Hello, class, and welcome to CS 303. This is chapter number 2, lecture number 4. Okay, now I am on slide number 2, and now we will be shifting gears and talking about operating systems structure. So we'll discuss operating systems structure. Okay. So as such, we know that uh, an OS is extremely large and complex. We saw in the very first lecture what the size of a typical OS can be in terms of millions of lines of code, right? So one approach is that we partition the OS into many components, many subparts, right? Each being a well-defined portion of the system with its own interfaces and functions. Okay. So rather than dealing with all the code as one part, what we do is we divide that OS code into many subparts. Each part is a component. For each part, the functions that it performs are very well defined. Okay, so we'll soon see what those are. And the interfaces are also well defined. So functions, these components will need to interact with each other, sometimes heavily, and therefore the interfaces using which they can interact, they have to be well defined as well. Okay. So the general idea is rather than dealing with the whole piece of code, it is better to deal separately with the sub pieces. As an analogy, we've all done C programming. So one option is that you have all of your code in main, right? So you have a main function, right? So the significance of the main function, what is it? Significance of the main function is that your program always starts execution from there, right? From the beginning of main, whichever is the first statement, it will start executing from there. So one option is you have a C program, all of your code is in main, correct? Other option is you are using a number of functions, right? And then from the main, all you're doing is you're calling functions, right? So to give you an example, I don't know if you did this. One C programming example is reading a line from the input, reading the next line from the input, and storing the longest line read so far. Okay, so reading a line from the input and storing the longest line read so far. So what you need to do is you need to read from the input one line at a time, correct? And then once you've read the current line, you have to compare it with the previous longest line. If the current line is longer than the previous longest, current line becomes a new longest, you store it. If the current line is smaller, its length is smaller, so length is just a number of characters in it. If the length of the current line is smaller than the previous longest, then you don't do anything, the previous longest stays. If it's equal, it's up to you, you can make a call. You can store either one or both, right? So for this kind of program, it can get fairly complicated, right? Perhaps 50-60 lines of code. Yeah. So one option is everything is in main. That can get a bit difficult to read and analyze. If you have written the code and everything is in the main, all the code is in the main with no functions whatsoever, and you give it to a friend, they might have a hard time reading it. On the other hand, if you have functions, it gives a lot more structure to the program. So what are the functions you can have? You can have one function for reading the next line, right? And you can have another function for storing the longest line, right? And then in the main, you call those functions, and then those functions are written outside main separately. So option number 2, the program has a much better structure. It's a lot easier to read. Your main becomes uncluttered, becomes very small. You're mostly just calling functions from there. So it gives a good amount of structure to your program. So similar approach we take with an operating system as well. Rather than dealing with the whole OS at once, we divide it into components, and then we try to study or analyze each component separately. Okay. Now I am on slide 3. Title of this is also operating system structure. Slide 3. So as we have already seen, a general purpose operating system. So like Windows and Linux and Apple's OS. So it's a very large program, millions of lines of code. So in order to understand the system, in order to analyze it, in order to extend it, right? It is good to structure it into components. So now we discuss some popular structures for an OS, right? If we start with a simple structure for DOS, then we move on to more complex for Unix or Linux. Then we talk about a layered structure, then microkernel structure, then a hybrid structure. Okay. So different ways in which we can structure an operating system. Okay. So now I am on slide number 4, simple structure MS-DOS. So if you look at the dictionary definition of structure, what do we see? So if you do a quick search, it says the arrangement of and relations between the parts or elements of something very complex. Okay, so arrangement of and relations between the parts or elements of something very complex. So this perfectly fits into what we're talking about, the operating system. It's complex, so we divide it into parts. Now how those parts of the OS are arranged, and how are the interactions between those parts. Essentially that's what we're going to be discussing. So now we look at simple structure, MS-DOS, right? Microsoft Disk Operating System. Okay. So we know it's an old one, and initially it had only a command line interface. There was no graphical user interface, no GUI. So MS-DOS was written to provide the most functionality in the least amount of space. So in those times, memory was extremely expensive. So even with a small amount of memory, you needed to provide the maximum functionality, do the most. Okay. So here we see the structure. We have you see the different parts of the OS, different components. On the top, of course, you have application programs. So your whatever application is running, right? For example, your shell, right, or any other program that's running on it. And then you have a resident system program. So we can divide applications into two parts, or programs into two parts: user programs and system programs, right? So user application is something like a Word or a PowerPoint. System application, system program could be a part of the OS kernel. It could be the memory manager. It could be the task scheduler, the device manager, and so on. So essentially, they're both pieces of code. And below that, you've got the device drivers, various kinds: MS-DOS device drivers, ROM, BIOS device drivers. So we know from our discussion from chapter 1 what device drivers are. Pieces of code that ensure that the various devices and the OS kernel can talk to each other, can interact with each other. Right? So pieces of code that do that. Okay, so we can see from this diagram, although MS-DOS has some structure, its interfaces and levels of functionality are not very well separated. So there's no good separation. For example, one issue which you can spot right away is the application programs can directly access the device drivers, which means if somebody wants, they can write a malicious piece of code and they can take control of the device driver. Any program, user program, can take control of the device driver. So generally, this can be an issue, right? So of course, to be fair to the design, uh, the designers were limited by the hardware available at that time, Intel 8088 processor, and there was no dual mode in that, right? So that dual mode level of security was not there. So this is general structure of MS DOS. So there is some structure, but if you look at the secure from the security point of view, it is not very strong. Okay. Okay. Now I am on slide 5, slide number 5, and here we talk about another OS structure. This time for Unix. Okay. So we know Unix is a very popular operating system from which both Linux, right, like Ubuntu Linux, and Apple's OS X have been derived. Okay. So the parent OS for both of them is Linux. Okay. So let's discuss the structure of Unix briefly. So single binary file running in a single address space. So there's one address space and the single binary file which corresponds to the OS. Okay. So there are two major parts: kernel and system programs. So that is one distinction they made. The core of the OS, right? So whenever you boot up the OS and no programs are running, right? And that core functionality, that is called the kernel. Right? And the other part is of course your programs. Right? So kernel consists of everything below the system call interface and above the physical hardware. So in the next slide we will look at a picture of it. So kernel consists of everything below system call interface and above the physical hardware, right? So at the lowest layer we have the hardware, then we have the OS kernel, right? And then above that we have the various kinds of programs, applications. So kernel provides the various duties of the kernel, provides a file system, CPU scheduling, memory management, and other operating system functions. So we'll see in the next slide what all those functions are. One point we do note over here is a very large number of functions or very large amount of functionality is provided in a single layer. So this we have to be careful about. A particular layer should not be overly complex. Okay. So essentially all the kernel functionality is in one layer, one level. So we call this kind of design as a monolithic. Okay, monolithic. So if you look at the definition of monolithic, formed by a single large block of stone, large, powerful, indivisible. Okay. So essentially it's one level, one block, one chunk of code. So it's called monolithic. So disadvantage of this, very hard to debug and extend. Too much going on in one block or layer. So within one layer you have a lot of functionality, and each particular functionality is a piece of code, corresponds to a piece of code, and so you have these large number of pieces of code. Now each piece can and does interact with the other. So it becomes very difficult to monitor those interactions, to find out exactly what's going on, to debug. Right? And very difficult to extend also, because again, to extend something you have to understand it completely, and if you cannot make out the interactions between various functionalities in the same level, things become very hard. So that is one disadvantage, hard to debug and extend. Advantage of course is it's a fast OS and has various subparts in the same block, same address space, so fast communication. So essentially the whole kernel code is in a single address space, single block of memory, and all the components are in proximity to each other memory wise, right? So because of that, the memory accesses are, you can use locality, principles of locality. You would have studied in architecture, and essentially your code will run fast. If parts of the kernel are in different address spaces, then you have to switch address spaces, and then your memory access time will increase. So advantage is performance, disadvantage hard to debug and extend. So as you can see, trade-offs are involved. So now I am on slide number 6, and we see the traditional Unix system structure. So we discussed it previously, now we are seeing the picture. So you can see the various components. At the bottom you have your hardware. So your physical memory, your disks and tapes, secondary form of memory, your terminals, and then of course each of these are devices. So as we discussed, for each device you have a controller associated with it. Then you have the kernel interface to the hardware, right? And then you have the actual kernel. So all the functionality, CPU scheduling, page replacement, demand paging, virtual memory, all memory functionality, file system, character handling, I/O signals, and so on. So all the kernel functionality is crammed into one layer. Then you have system call interface to the kernel. Then you have various programs, shells and commands, compilers and interpreters, system libraries, and then the users. Right? So the user will run a program. Program is a piece of code running in user space. It from time to time it needs an OS service, so it will make a system call, which would be using the API would be a wrapper function, a C function. System call would lead to, as we have discussed, a kernel crossing, shifting from user mode to kernel mode. Kernel would execute the system call on the user behalf and give back the results. So you can see this is a Unix structure. More layers as compared to DOS. Still a lot of functionality in the kernel. Okay, now I am on slide number 7. The title of which is a Linux system structure. Okay, so slide number 7, Linux system structure. So as we can see, this structure is heavily derived from which OS structure? Heavily derived from Unix, which we saw in the previous slide. So you can see that there are some modules, and to a large extent it's still monolithic, because you can see all the kernel functionality is provided in one layer, running in one address space, one block of memory. So at the top you have applications, right? And all the applications use the glibc standard library when communicating with the system call interface to the kernel. So if you do a simple Google search on glibc, you will get the first hit, gnu.org/software/libc. Okay, so once again I'll repeat, gnu.org /software/libc. So this is a GNU C library, glibc, and as it mentions there, the GNU C library project provides the core libraries for the GNU system and GNU Linux systems, as well as other systems that use Linux as the kernel. These libraries provide critical APIs, including POSIX, BSD, and so on. These APIs include such foundational facilities as open, read, write, malloc, printf, get address info, thread create, crypt, login, exit, and more. So you're encouraged to check this library out. But as such, this library includes the API functions, which help us or help the programmers or the applications in calling system calls to avail OS facilities. Okay. So later in the course we'll be looking at the POSIX API in more detail. Right. So then you have system call interface, then you have your kernel, right? Networking, memory management, CPU scheduling, file system, support for various devices. Then you have your device drivers, and at the lowest layer you have the hardware. So heavily inspired from Unix. Some modules are there, but at the same time, the Linux is totally monolithic. Okay. Okay. Now I am on slide number 8, and the title for this slide is layered approach. So slide number 8, layered approach. So as we have been discussing, while designing or while structuring an OS, there are two philosophies, two school of thoughts. One is of course to put everything, the whole functionality in only one piece of code, right? And the other school of thought is to have lot of layers, divide the OS into different parts, and then have the interactions between them. So this particular approach discusses that to have a layered operating system, so consisting of many layers. So philosophy is that the operating system is divided into a number of layers, each built on top of lower layers. So of course we have to figure out what kind of functionality each layer will have. So some parts are easy. We know that the lowest layer will definitely be that of the hardware, and we know that the highest layer will definitely be that of the user interface, right? So we have these modules, we have modular code, and with this modularity, layers are selected such that each uses functions, operations, and services of only the lower level layers. Okay. So layer one, you may have probably device drivers, right? For example. So advantage of this layered approach is it's easier to debug the OS and extend it, because you can move layer by layer, right? Rather than having millions of lines of code staring at you, virtually impossible to figure out what's going wrong. If you have to do debugging with a layered approach, it's a lot easier because you can start at one layer. You can say, okay, fine, I looked at the user interface layer, nothing is wrong there. Now let me go one level down and check it. So each of these layers, the amount of code you have will be much less, a subset of the total amount of code that the OS has. So you're doing something like divide and conquer. You're breaking the OS into separate layers, and then you're analyzing each of them separately. Likewise, extending an OS is also simple, because if you want to add a new CPU scheduling algorithm, or you want to improve the performance of any CPU scheduling algorithm, you know exactly which layer to look in. Right? So this is the layered approach. Okay, now I am on slide 9, layered OS. So we saw some advantages of a layered operating system: easy to analyze, easy to debug, easy to extend, right? Um, some challenges, again, in computer science, nothing comes for free. There's always a cost, a trade-off. What are the issues, the challenges with the layered OS? Now you need to define the layers very carefully. So depending on which layer you're talking about, it can be easy or hard, right? So for example, if the philosophy is that a layer interacts only with its lower layers and not with the higher ones, or a layer needs services only of the lower layers, then the placement of layers can become easy or challenging, right? So for example, a device driver for disk versus a memory management module. So this one is easy. The memory management module you'll have at the top, and the device driver for disk at the bottom. So memory management will make what the device driver will do is, it will piece of code which will run for the disk. It will make the data obtained from the disk. It will store it in a buffer and make it available to the OS, and the memory management module can read from it. So in this case, it's quite looks quite simple. Memory management will be above the device driver. but there can be other complex interactions, and for those cases it may not be immediately clear, which one will come on top, which will come on bottom. So I won't say that it is impossible, but it can be a challenge to define the layers. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide 10. Again, this is titled Layered OS. Second challenge or issue or problem, if you can say, with the layered operating system is that they tend to be less efficient. Okay, because generally, whenever you are communicating from one layer to other, there's an overhead. Right. In the previous case, in a monolithic system, the whole code is running in one address space, so memory accesses are efficient. Here, each communication between one layer to the other will carry some overhead. You may make some function calls, from for communication among one layer, between one layer and the other, and each of those function calls will take some time, will carry an overhead. So system call or function call may be modified, parameters may be modified, data added, right? So again, that's a trade-off. In the case of a layered system, enhanced structure and enhanced debugging facilities come at the cost of efficiency. So clearly a trade-off between monolithic and layered OS. Monolithic operations are fast. Ability to extend and debug is not very good. It's very hard. Layered OS ability to debug and extend is much easier, but performance is not as good. So generally a trade-off involved. The extreme cases, and as is the general approach, what makes sense is we try to look for a middle path. Okay, so we try to get the best of both worlds, so to speak. So we have layering, we have the layers, but we have a small number of layers, right? And we have more functionality per layer. So we are getting a bit of good performance because number of layers is less, and we're also getting efficient performance, right? And at the same time, we are also getting the advantages, a bit of advantages of layered OS, which is better structure and good or nice debugging facilities, ease of debugging, right? So go for the middle path. Okay, so now I am on slide 11. Title of which is microkernel. So as the name suggests, microkernel, a very small kernel. So a bit of history. What happened was that Unix expanded, more and more functionality was added to Unix, so it became larger and quite hard to manage as it became bigger and bigger. So then CMU, Carnegie Mellon University in USA, they invented the microkernel in the mid 80s to sort of solve this Unix problem in the mid 1980s. So this was called a MACH, MACH. So this was a microkernel approach. What is the key idea? The key idea is that the OS is structured by removing the non-essential components from the kernel, okay, and implementing them in user mode as user program. So we know that we have a user space and a kernel space. User code executes in user space, kernel code executes in kernel space. So what they thought was, now since the kernel is monolithic, it's become huge. So how can we reduce the size of the kernel? So the idea was we can reduce the size of the kernel by taking some facilities, some services, right, some components away from the kernel, removing them from the kernel and putting them in user space. So of course now one question comes that if they are in user space, what is the protection that they can get, right? Because within kernel space you have dual mode and all those things, right? So if they are in user space, the protection can still be taken care of. because the communication which happens between all these components in user space, it has to pass through the kernel. So result is a smaller kernel providing only the core facilities. What are those? CPU scheduling, memory management, IPC, inter-process communication. So we'll be discussing all of these. Now what we need to keep in the kernel and what we need to keep in user space, that depends. People may have different philosophies and it's generally a design decision. But in general, the scheduling, memory management and inter-process communication, IPC, they are generally part of the kernel. So how do the various modules in user space communicate with each other? They do message passing. So there's an API for message passing. Using those functions, using that API, they can communicate with each other. So for example, if a client program wishes to access a file, it has to interact with the file server. Okay. So client will not interact directly, program will not interact directly, but they will various components, for example the user and the client's file server, they will not interact directly, but they will communicate indirectly by exchanging messages with the microkernel. So in the next slide we'll see how that is happening. Okay. So now I am on slide 12, microkernel system structure. So this shows a microkernel in the form of a picture, and we can see at the top, at the bottom, as usual, we have hardware, and then we have a very small kernel. So if you compare it with the monolithic Linux kernel, Unix kernel, it's very small, providing IPC, memory management, CPU scheduling. Other services are in the user space. So file system, you can see, which was earlier in the kernel, is in user space. Device driver code is in user space. Application programs, definitely, they have to be in user space anyway. And these various components, so whenever an application program needs to interact with the file system, so these two components interact with each other using message passing. So there's a message passing API which they use, and all messages are routed through the kernel, which checks for the authenticity and the security aspect of it. Okay. So this is in general the structure of the microkernel. So once again, the design philosophy is remove some of the non-core, non-essential components from the kernel and shift them into user space. Okay, so result is a much smaller kernel. Okay, now I am on slide 13. So this one is also called microkernel system structure. Slide 13. So an example of microkernel, Mark is an example. And the significance is that Apple's kernel, OS kernel, Darwin, is based on the Mark. Okay, so Darwin takes the microkernel approach. In fact, if you read the book, Windows NT also took the microkernel approach. Okay. So benefits of microkernel, one is obvious. Now the kernel is much smaller in size. So it is much easier to analyze, much easier to debug, much easier to extend. Looking at smaller piece of code. Okay. So easier to extend the OS. And if you want to add a new service, let's say, and now because that service is executing in user space, it's a lot easier. Because the kernel will remain unchanged. Okay. Previously, all the services were inside the kernel, right, in the monolithic approach. So when you changed one service, it had all kinds of interactions, and it was very hard to figure out what's going on because the kernel itself was changing. So here all extensions are done exactly only in the user space. So adding a service is easy. There's no change to kernel. Changes to kernel themselves are also easier if you want to add a CPU scheduling algorithm, because now the kernel size is smaller, less code in the kernel. Okay. People argue that this may also be more reliable. Microkernel may be more reliable. Why? Services run in user space, so less code is running in kernel space. If a service fails, kernel is untouched. Right? Previously, everything, all the services were running in kernel space. So a malicious piece of code could directly access the kernel. It was all one address space. It was not reliable, not secure. Here, the services are running all in user space, and if one service is unreliable or there's some security issue, you just shut it down. So it is as simple as killing a program. Kernel will be untouched. Okay. Because kernel is separated. So those are the benefits. Disadvantages: performance overhead of user space to kernel space communication. So now, when each component needs to interact with each other, they have to pass messages. Each message means calling the API, calling a function, additional overhead. They're in separate address spaces. So that performance overhead is there. So in fact, Windows NT initially it was a microkernel, and then because of this excessive message passing overhead, they had to take some of the functionality, some of the components, and put them back into the kernel, so that this message passing overhead is reduced. So later on, due to performance issues, it was by the time after NT, when Windows XP was designed, it was more or less closer to the monolithic approach than the microkernel approach, mostly due to performance. Okay, so now I am on slide 14, where we discuss yet another way to structure an operating system, and this one is using modules. Okay, so another very popular design approach uses what we call loadable kernel modules. Okay, so here the main thing is you know a very small kernel has a set of core components, so like microkernel, and additional services are linked via modules during boot time or runtime. So the idea is that many modules may not be needed during a particular boot of an OS. So if they are not needed, why load all of them in the beginning? We can load them at runtime, or as and when required. Of course, we also have if we want, we can also load the modules during boot time. So, so here you have a very small kernel providing core components, and then additional services, kernel services are linked via modules either during boot up time, right, when you plug your machine on, or during runtime whenever you require a module. So this technique is used by all modern operating systems, Linux, Mac, Windows, right? One appeal is load the module as needed, no need to load at once. So which means your boot up is very fast. So adding new services becomes easy now. Just add another module and load it dynamically while the kernel is running as needed. For example, when USB drive is inserted. Right? So kernel is untouched, no need to change and recompile the kernel. So note that in the monolithic case, whenever you make any change to any service, it's because it's in the kernel, so you have to recompile the kernel, right? The piece of code, and then when you recompile the kernel, this huge piece of code, you get errors which are very difficult to fix. So here, additional modules are not part of the kernel, so kernel as such is untouched. Again, core components similar to microkernel case could be scheduling or memory management. Example of a loadable module could be a file system. Now I am on slide 15. So this shows the module approach being used by Solaris operating system. So quite this is Solaris is similar to Unix. So you can see you have the core Solaris kernel, and then you've got different modules, right? File system, scheduling classes, various drivers, miscellaneous modules, loadable system calls, stream modules, and so on. So basic idea is have a very small kernel, and rest of the services are in the form of modules which you can load at boot up or as and when required. Okay. So now I am on slide 16, hybrid systems. Okay. Slide 16, hybrid systems. Now we've seen many philosophies of how we can design an OS. At one extreme is a monolithic approach where all the functionalities, all the services are in single kernel module and running in one address space. And on the other hand, we have a layered approach in which we divide the functionalities or services into different components, and then we have interaction between them. So as we discussed, there are advantages and disadvantages to both, right? So monolithic versus layered. So can we have a sort of middle path? So try to get best of both worlds, advantages of both. So we know that for monolithic systems share the same address space, so are efficient, faster memory accesses, right? Layered structure is more flexible, easier to debug and extend, but performance is not as good as monolithic because you have a lot of overhead while making system calls, function calls among layers. Okay. So if we talk about real operating systems, modern operating systems, Linux and Solaris kernels are monolithic, and plus they are also modular for dynamic loading of functionality. Okay, so give you flexibility. Windows is mostly monolithic performance, plus microkernel is there for different subsystems, which in the Windows terminology they call them personalities. So some services are running in user space, and then they also have dynamic modules. So if you look at operating systems, they tend to shift a bit more towards monolithic. So that means they're choosing performance a bit more than ease of understanding, ease of debugging, and so on. Okay. So, but again, they try to have hybrid, best of both approaches. So, have smaller number of layers. So you have your structure is also there, and plus debugging extension becomes easier. Plus performance wise also you don't lose much because number of layers is small, as opposed to a totally layered system, right, with large number of layers. So now we will discuss the structure of three popular operating systems: Apple's OS X for desktops, laptops, Apple's iOS for iPhones, and Google's Android. Okay, so we will discuss the structure, design features of these three. So now I am on slide number 17, where we talk about Mac OS and iOS, right, or OS X and iOS. So of course there's some similarities and some differences. Right, the core may be the same. So here in the next slide is a picture, but there are various layers in it. So one layer is user experience layer. So this is generally the UI or user interface layer. So we saw earlier user interface can be in terms of a command line, CLI, command line interface, or graphical user interface. So they term their user interface as Aqua interface for mouse and trackpad. Okay, that's what they call the interface. And as far as for mobile phones, you need a touch interface. So that interface is called a springboard. Okay, so at the top you have a UI layer. Then you have an application framework layer below UI layer, application framework layer. So what does this consist of? Consists of Cocoa and Cocoa Touch frameworks, which provide APIs for Objective-C and Swift programming languages respectively. These create user applications. So if you want to create user applications, if you want to code apps, of course you need a programming language, and they had a choice of many. And for Mac OS, they picked Objective-C, version of C, and for iOS, they picked Swift. Right. So those frameworks for programming for coding user applications, they're in the application framework layer, where they are open for use by program developers, whoever wants to build an app, right? So they have all the APIs, and using that you can create user applications. Right? Below this application framework layer, you have core frameworks, right, which support graphics UPIs. So they support OpenGL and then media APIs, QuickTime. So for all these services, now we're talking from the point of view of the programmer. So to implement all of these OS services, you need APIs, right? So application programming interface. So you have these APIs, these functions, which you call in your program, and then they access the appropriate OS service. So for programmers, as we had discussed, job is very easy. Just call the API, leads to system call execution, and get back the results in your program. So you have APIs for graphics, right? OpenGL is what they use, and then you have APIs for media, or QuickTime Media Player, right? So when they're also used by the programmers. Then you have a kernel environment wherein you have Darwin. So this one actually is an amalgamation, a combination of two kernels. One is Mach microkernel, another is BSD Unix kernel. So Berkeley Software Division, and a version of the Unix kernel. Okay. So an observation: one can bypass layers. For example, a C program with no UI that makes POSIX system calls. So in that case, you don't need the UI layer. So application can directly communicate with the kernel. Okay, so these are the various layers which are common to Mac OS or OS X and iOS. So now I am on slide number 18, and here this shows a picture of the structure of Mac OS and iOS. So the layers which we were talking about in the previous slide, here's a corresponding picture. So you see applications on top, right? Your programs, basically your apps. Then you have a UI layer, user experience layer, application frameworks, right? Your Objective-C, your Swift programming languages, core frameworks, graphics APIs, media APIs, for example. And then you have your actual kernel, which is Darwin, which is a combination of Mach microkernel and BSD Unix. Okay. So where BSD is stands for Berkeley Software Division. So if you want to explore, there's a kernel called FreeBSD. So free and open source Unix-like operating system provided by the Berkeley Software Division, which you can explore and play around with if you would like. So this is the structure for Mac OS and iOS. Okay, so now I am on slide 19, titled Darwin. Right, so now we focus on the kernel. Okay, we can see below, above the kernel, you had various frameworks provided to programmers, core frameworks, application frameworks. You had the UI layer, you had the applications. Below you have the kernel. So kernel is Darwin, and as we had mentioned, a combination of Mach microkernel and BSD Unix. Okay. So in the next slide we have a picture of it. So here we have two kernels, right? So it is sort of trying to get the best of both kernels. So because we have two kernels, there are two sets of system calls provided. So Mach has its own set of system calls. BSD Unix has its own set of system calls. So to recall, what does the system call do? Each system call provides a particular OS service. Right? So now the question is, what are the roles and responsibilities, the functions of each of these different kernels? So Mach provides memory management, okay, IPC, inter-process communication, and scheduling. Whereas BSD provides command line tools, support for networking and file systems, and implementation of POSIX APIs. So POSIX APIs is for making the system calls, right? So if I just see POSIX, right, stands for Portable Operating System Interface. So we looked at this in chapter 2. It's a bunch of APIs, bunch of wrapper functions using which you can access system calls for the Unix kernel. Okay. So these are of course provided by BSD. Okay. So the microkernel is for scheduling, IPC memory management, and the Unix kernel is for command line tools, support for networking, support for file systems, and for the POSIX APIs. So they're using both. So below the kernel, what we see is a bunch of layers. We have an IO kit, which is an environment for development of device drivers. So this is primarily for the programmers like you. Right? If tomorrow you were to get a job in Apple where you are told to, write the device driver code for a bunch of devices, and this IO kit is what you would be using, this environment, right? So it will provide you, so just like we have a Eclipse as an environment for C and Java programs and so on, IO kit for device drivers. We have kernel extensions, right? KEXTS, kernel extensions. So these are dynamically loadable modules. So there's a support for that. We've already discussed that. So a good part about Darwin is that it has been made open source by Apple, and the complete source code is available at opensource.apple.com. So this website consists of all the programs, all the pieces of code that have been open sourced by Apple. So everybody can look at it and see how it has been implemented and so on. So you're encouraged to visit this website to check it out. Okay. So next we look at slide 20. So this just shows us a picture of Darwin, or rather the structure of Darwin, right? So we've got so this is our Darwin kernel, and you can see it includes both BSD Unix and Mach microkernel. So top you have applications and library interface APIs and all, right? And then you have functionalities for both Mach and Unix. We have POSIX system calls. So later we'll be doing programming on these using these. Mach kernel is providing microkernel is providing memory management, IPC scheduling. You've got the IO kit for device drivers. You've got the kernel extensions within Mach, right? And then you've got traps or interrupts, right? And you have interactions between so these various parts interact with each other, right? Application will interact with the kernel using APIs, right? Likewise, there will be a mechanism for communication between system calls and the kernel, right? And so on. In general, this is the structure for Darwin. Okay. So now I am on slide 21. Looks like this is the last slide for today. And here we look at iOS. So Apple's mobile operating system for iPhones and iPads. So as I said, not surprisingly, because it's made by the same company, iOS is structured on Mac OS X with additional functionality. Okay. So it does not run OS X applications natively, right? So any application which is running for OS X on a desktop without a change, it cannot be run on iOS. Okay. And of course, it also runs on iOS runs on a different CPU architecture. It runs on ARM versus Mac OS X, which runs on Intel. So what are the different layers here? So you have Cocoa Touch, Media Services, Core Services, Core OS, right? So starting at the bottom, the core operating system. This is based on Mac OS X, of course, which is a desktop version. And since it's closed source, we don't know a lot about it. Okay. But definitely with the Mac OS X kernel as a base, they have modified it uh, to come up with the kernel for iOS, the core OS. So definitely many changes would have been made because now efficiency becomes very important, even at the cost of performance, because you have to maximize battery life. So then on top you have your Cocoa Touch, right? Objective C API for developing apps. Okay, so we know that the user interface is based on touch, right? Swift user interface, and again from the programmer's point of view, they need an API for developing apps, set of functions they can use to develop apps, right? So that is provided in the Cocoa Touch layer using, and programmers have to use Objective C. Okay. Below you have media services layer, which will take care of graphics, audio, video services, right? Then you have core services, which among other things takes care of cloud computing, takes care of databases, and then below you have the core OS. So unfortunately, we don't know a lot about iOS since it's mostly closed source. Okay, so this is the basic structure for iOS. So Cocoa Touch for programmers API for creating applications. Then a layer for taking care of graphics, audio, video. Again, those services have to be provided, right? Another layer for providing the core services, cloud computing databases, right? And then at the lowest layer you have your core operating system or core kernel. Okay, so this is iOS.